Hey everyone,
Hey guys.
welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about travel therapy housing, but more specifically traveling in an RV. We've made videos on this in the past, but we get a lot of questions these days. It seems like traveling in an RV or a van or something like that has gotten more popular. So we get questions about which to choose pretty often. So today we want to go through the different types of campers, RVs, and talk about the pros and cons and what you might want to choose based on your situation. Because this is something we thought a lot about when we started traveling in the fifth wheel 7 years ago, which type of camper we wanted to actually travel in. Ultimately, we decided on the fifth wheel, but there's obviously pros and cons to each, and it really depends on your individual situation. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and I'm going to get this video shared in a couple groups.
All right, hey everyone. For those that may not know us, we are Whitney and Jared Kazaza. We are the faces behind Travel Therapy Mentor, and formerly our older blog was called Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist, which we named after traveling in a fifth wheel camper. So for those of you guys that may not know that, we traveled in a fifth wheel for the first few years of our travel PT careers. So as Jared mentioned, we've talked about this topic a few different times before, but we've never really done one in depth on the different types of RVs there are, and we do get a lot of questions about that, about purchasing the right type, choosing the right type. So recently we had one of our friends, Kayla, who is a travel PT and travels in an RV with her husband. We had her write a guest post for us, and she broke down all the different types of RVs, some decision making that goes into choosing the right one, a lot of the decision making that both her and her husband had with picking the RV for their situation. So we'll go over some of the insights that she had as well as our own insights.
Yeah, so first, I guess let's real quick go over.
Well, before we dive into the topic, for those of you that are watching live, sorry we're hopping on here a little bit late. You might notice that we are vertical right now. Usually for the last however many years we've been doing videos, 5 years, we've always done our videos horizontally, and for some reason tonight Facebook Live just didn't want to work horizontally. We tried and tried and tried, and so here we are tuning in with you guys vertically.
It's not that bad, it's just we have to be way too close together,
Yeah.
which is a little weird.
So anyway, thank you for those of you that are tuning in live. If you're watching live, we'd love if you'd say hello in the comments. If you're watching later on the replay, you can say hi in the comments and let us know you watched, whether it was on YouTube or Facebook, and then shout out to you guys that are listening on our podcast as well.
Yeah, so first, just a little bit about why you would choose RV in the first place, or, short-term housing versus an RV. Housing is a big decision as a traveler because it's usually going to be your most expensive cost, like in terms of everything you spend money on, tax home, your meals, gas, all that. Usually the place that you rent or the place that you get on your travel assignment is going to cost you more than anything else. And most people they never even consider an RV. It's like, well, I'm just going to do short-term housing. I'll find an Airbnb or something, and that'll be fine. They don't really care much about, of course, no one wants to pay $3,000 a month, but the difference between like maybe $1,000, $1,500, it's not a huge deal for a lot of people if you're making pretty good money. So the people that do choose RVs, I think a lot of times it's people that either are more outdoorsy, it's people that have kids and they don't want to be taking their kids from like one house to another house to another house, or it's someone that has like pets, and especially if it's multiple dogs, because it can be hard finding short-term housing with dogs. So a lot of the people that contact us are in one of those situations. Either they really love to camp, they like campgrounds, they have kids and they want their kids to have some consistency, or they have pets and they don't have to worry about pet deposits and finding places that are pet friendly.
Yeah.
So those are big factors why, if you're choosing to travel and you're thinking like, oh, am I going to do short-term housing or am I going to choose an RV? If you're in one of those situations, then an RV might be a really good fit for you.
We actually do get a lot of people who reach out to us trying to decide if an RV would be a good choice simply for the fact that they want to save money.
Yeah.
So because housing prices are going up and people are like, oh, rents are so crazy, people look at it strictly as a financial choice, and they're like, oh, this seems like a great idea. Maybe I could just get an RV and then I'll save a ton of money on housing. Unfortunately, we don't want to burst your bubble, but that's not necessarily the case. In a lot of situations, you're really not going to come out that far ahead, if at all, with an RV, because you have to consider the upfront costs, the maintenance costs, and the depreciation costs.
Yeah. We've made videos on that in the past. If that's something you're very interested in, I think we made one specifically about whether or not you'll save money in an RV, because that's initially the reason we chose to do it. We were in none of those categories I talked about with like outdoorsy, kids, dogs, none of those. We just thought we'd save money. And to our dismay, we did not save a lot of money. It was basically break even over 3 years. So the only people that probably will save money in an RV are people that are going to be traveling for a very long time. So probably 4, 5, 6 years. If you're going to travel that long, then yes, all those upfront costs, you can kind of depreciate those over time, I guess, or like work those out over time, versus basically the upfront cost versus how much you save per month. That upfront cost is very big compared to the monthly savings. So you need to amortize that over a longer period of time for it to make more sense.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that a lot of people have a misconception about is that you won't have to pay housing costs other than the cost of the RV. But unfortunately, as travelers, in order to meet the IRS rules, if you're going to take the tax-free stipends, you still need to be duplicating housing expenses, and that doesn't count if you just like have a payment on the camper itself. You have to actually pay for a place to park it, which would be like paying at an RV park or a campground or paying to stay on someone's property.
And honestly, realistically, you almost have to do that anyway. Like even if there was a way to get around paying duplicate expenses in terms of a campground, you still would want to be at a campground because they've got the amenities, they've got showers, they've got hookups. It's like, where would you even park an RV like while you're at work or something? It's not real easy to just boondock everywhere. You can do it for a couple days, but for 3 months, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, so if you're somebody who's trying to decide whether RVing or short-term housing would be right for you, we definitely have some articles and some videos talking about that choice specifically, but overall, as a summary, you need to consider the lifestyle choice of RVing and all that it's going to entail, and if that's something you want to tackle, and also the initial upfront costs and investment of it. And we think if you're going to travel for 3+ years, it may make sense for you, but in a lot of cases, if you're traveling for less than 3 years, financially, it may not make sense, but lifestyle-wise, it could still make sense.
Yep.
But say that you have decided that you've looked into all those factors, you really think that RVing is going to be the right choice for you, for your family, or whatever your situation might be. Well, your next thing might be, well, how do I go about finding an RV, and like what types should I be looking at?
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of different types of campers, and it's kind of funny to think about now because we spend so much time learning about campers that it seems pretty obvious, but I know that it's not obvious because when we first started looking, I didn't know what a fifth wheel was, and I remember someone said that to me, and like fifth wheel doesn't sound like it would be a camper. Like that sounds like, if you don't know anything about it, it sounds something different. So I had no idea what that even was. So I know that there are people out there that have no idea about the different types of campers, and when they're trying to decide, they're just completely lost.
Yeah, so we're going to go over some of the different types and some of the decision making that might go into you deciding one type or another, and just some considerations that you might have.
Yeah.
So we'll start with just the different classifications. That way you can kind of understand the lingo and the choices.
Yeah, and basically the two big classifications is either a motorhome or a pull behind.
A travel trailer.
A travel trailer. Yeah, well, people call them different things. Pull behind would be separately classified into either a fifth wheel or a travel trailer. But yeah, mobile home is one that actually has an engine that you're driving. A pull behind is going to be something where you have a truck or a van or a SUV that you pull the camper with.
Yeah, I guess another terminology for that would be towables. So
towable.
Either you're towing a certain type of camper or you're driving a certain type of camper. So your motorhomes are the ones that you drive. And this is when you think of somebody like a tour bus or like one of those big bus-looking type things. That's kind of in the category of your motorhomes versus the type we had, the fifth wheel, that's a towable. You pull it behind a truck.
Yep. And the motorhomes are separated into Class A, B, and C. And so the Class A is like Whitney said, that's like the stereotypical camper or motorhome that you think of, like a big bus-looking thing. There's rich old people driving it, and they're just like going around the country, and that's what I think of when I think of like a motorhome. Whereas a Class B is basically just an oversized van. It's just a big van that has usually a bathroom, sometimes a little tiny kitchen, but it's like a cargo van that is now a camper, or even bigger than a cargo van, a little bigger than that. And then a Class C is kind of a mix between the two. It's not as like fancy and nice as a Class A, one of those like real sleek bus-looking things, but it's bigger than a van. It's kind of in between, and usually it will have like two beds. One of the beds is often over top of the cab, and it's kind of a good mix. Like you see a lot of families and things in those types. whereas the Class A is more like usually retired older people, at least that we usually see.
Yeah, your Class B is going to look a lot more like a van on the front, just a regular front of the vehicle, where your Class C is typically going to have that part that hangs over the windshield a little bit, and that's usually a bunk up inside of there, so there's usually a bit more living space in your Class C than your Class B. It's kind of weird that they labeled them that way. To be honest, it should have been flipped, in my opinion. It should have just gone from like big to small, but it's like big, small, medium. Is kind of how the A, B, C works.
Whitney wasn't consulted when they came up with the classifications.
Should have asked me.
Yeah.
You know. So those are your 3 different types of motorhomes. So if you go and you start looking at dealerships or looking online, you might look in those categories if that's the type of vehicle that you're leaning toward as a motorhome.
Yep. And then the pull-behinds are either a travel trailer or a fifth wheel. There's various sizes, and same with the Class A, Class C. There's various sizes there. They can be small, they can be huge, and the same with a travel trailer or a fifth wheel. They can be 10 feet or they can be 36 feet. They can be massive. And the difference there is usually fifth wheels are heavier. They sit on top of the truck kind of, so you need a different hitch than you would like with a bumper pull travel trailer. They just kind of attach to the bumper and you pull it that way. The fifth wheel is big, it sits over top, and usually that's where your bedroom is, over top, that part that hangs over the truck. And there's some other smaller differences, but the main thing is that you usually have more space in a fifth wheel, and that's where a lot of people choose it, but they are heavier, so you need a bigger tow vehicle. That's kind of a pro and con there.
Yeah, so the fifth wheel, which is what we had, and also what our friends Kayla and Ryan, who wrote the article, have, you have to have a special hitch that goes inside of the truck bed. So you have to have it installed in the truck. It looks like a big horseshoe. It's kind of a horseshoe shape. And it's really big. It takes up a good amount of the truck bed. You can't really put a whole lot else in the truck bed when you're going to be pulling a fifth wheel. And you drive the fifth wheel, or basically you back the camper up underneath the fifth wheel hitch, and it locks into the truck bed. So now it kind of swivels like this when you drive in the truck bed. Whereas the other kind, if it's a really small travel trailer, like Jared's at a bumper pull, you can just attach it right to the regular trailer hitch on like an SUV or a regular truck on the regular trailer hitch that it already has.
Yep.
So those are the categories there.
Yeah, and let's talk about some pros and cons between like either a motorhome or a pull behind.
Oh, real quick before we get into that. So then 2 other things that we didn't mention. Those are the main categories. But then you also have vans, like just regular vans, which a lot of times are like the van conversions where it started as a regular vehicle and you decide to convert it into a home. Those are going to be very similar to your Class B motorhomes.
It's like a smaller Class B.
Smaller. And then you also have truck bed campers, which these are not as common, but we actually did a couple months ago have another one of our travel therapy friends write a guest post about living in a truck camper. So there are some travel therapists living in truck campers, but those are going to be the smallest living space of all of them. Probably a little bit more similar to like a small van, a truck camper. And the truck campers are the ones that you're not pulling it behind on the ground at all. It just sits inside of the truck bed and goes up over the truck. So it just kind of takes your truck, where your truck kind of looks like this. The truck bed camper just goes like this, and it's all one thing. Nothing touches the ground.
But it can be detached once you like get to a campground. You can take it off and drive the truck separately. But yeah, that's definitely going to be the smallest. Either a regular van or a truck bed camper are the smallest options. The biggest options are going to be either a fifth wheel or like a really big Class A motorhome.
Yeah, and then I'll just to further break it down a little bit more, when you get into the weeds of reading about the different types, you're going to see all different types of layouts, and some of them may have different terminology associated with them. For the most part, your motorhomes are only going to have the A, B, and C terminology. Now, they might also have slide outs, which could just be a feature. So it could be all contained, or it could have a part of the room that slides in and out once you're parked. That's going to give you some extra square footage. So that could be some terminology you're looking for. Now, when it comes to travel trailers and fifth wheels, some other terminology you might see would be a bunkhouse. And a bunkhouse is just a different type of layout where instead of having one bedroom, it has a second bedroom that has bunk beds in it, which can be good for either children, guests, or some people turn it into extra storage or an office. If you have a partner who works from home, you can make it into an office. That's what Kayla and Ryan did. They used a bunkhouse room to make an office. You could also see the words toy hauler. a toy hauler can either be a type of fifth wheel or also a type of travel trailer where it basically has a garage. So the back end opens up and you can put, the reason they call it a toy hauler is some people that travel for leisure or whatever it might be, they might put an ATV, a four-wheeler, a motorcycle, bikes back there, things like that. But you could also use it for additional space, a guest bedroom, an office, just extra storage if you have a lot of like outdoor gear. So toy hauler is not its own class of RV. It's just sort of like a style. Yeah, it's like a style of fifth wheel or a style of travel trailer. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. Bunkhouse, toy hauler, and the slide outs are the types of categories you might look for.
Yeah, and those can make huge differences. Like a 30-foot travel trailer that has 3 slide outs is going to be so much bigger than a 30-foot travel trailer that doesn't have any slide outs. Like, little things make big differences in campers, especially when your space is already pretty limited. So you need to be pretty familiar with the different terminology and what you're looking for when you're going to start shopping around.
Yeah, so these are just some categories of things for you to be aware of. And obviously there's a lot of choices, right? So now you have to narrow it down. And it's like, how do you narrow it down? What types of things are going to be most important for you and which one is the best?
Yeah. All right. So you want to talk about pros and cons between them?
Yeah.
Okay. So pros and cons between a motorhome and like a pull-behind camper, because that's kind of the first decision you're going to have to make is like, do you want to have a motorhome or do you want to have a trailer that you pull with another vehicle? Pros and cons, the motorhome's almost always going to cost more for the same amount of space as a travel trailer or a fifth wheel. And the reason that is because it actually has an engine. It has all the components of a vehicle that you actually drive. So because of that, it's obviously got to be as expensive as the travel trailer or the fifth wheel, plus the engine and all the parts to actually make it a vehicle that drives itself. Whereas fifth wheels, travel trailers, sometimes you can get them pretty low cost, especially used ones. A Class A, those really nice bus-looking motorhomes, they can be $400,000, $500,000. They get really, really expensive. You can get cheaper ones, but you're not going to get a new Class A for probably less than $80,000. Like, they're very expensive. So cost is a major factor. If you're trying to be lower cost, then you're probably going to go more towards a fifth wheel or travel trailer and probably more towards a used fifth wheel travel trailer. And if cost isn't as much of an issue, then okay, maybe the motorhome might make more sense. Another thing to think about is one of the reasons we instantly chose a pull-behind instead of a motorhome is we wanted to be able to disconnect it and drive the truck separate so that I could use that to drive to work and Whitney could take her car to work. We rarely worked at the same facility, so we needed 2 vehicles. We didn't want to have a motorhome that we had to pull a car behind and then Whitney drive separately. We would rather have just pull the camper, set it up, and then never worry about connecting it or doing anything with it. We just drive the truck from then on.
Yeah, one of the big reasons that we came to that decision was, trying to navigate the vehicle situation. But the thing that really had us hung up is if you have a motorhome and something goes wrong with the engine portion of the motorhome and you need to have something done to the engine, transmission, so forth and so on, it's not just like taking your vehicle into the shop and then, carpooling or renting a car or getting a ride. You have to take your whole house in to get repairs. And to us, that seems really daunting because we're like, it's one thing if something breaks inside the trailer portion of it, your sink or your fridge or something like that. Maybe you take it in, or maybe you have somebody come fix it, or maybe you get by for a little while until it needs to be fixed or whatever. But we were like, if the engine or something needs to be fixed and you have to take the whole house in, that just seemed crazy to us.
Yeah, it did seem crazy. And also, it would be extremely costly if something like that happened. So, yeah, then you're not only having to get another vehicle if you didn't have 2 vehicles, you might have already been pulling one behind. But if you didn't, and that breaks down, now you need another vehicle. You also need like a hotel room or something until it gets fixed. So the idea of dealing with that was not something we wanted to do, and I think that most travelers probably feel that way. Once you kind of weigh the pros and cons, it's probably like, motorhome probably doesn't really make sense. This is more like an apartment I want to have set up and not like something I want to be moving around, especially if you're traveling as a couple.
Yeah, I mean, looking back now, it's like maybe if it had been, the Class B or C and the engine and drivetrain and everything was a little bit more just like a van or a truck, like maybe it wouldn't have been that crazy to go and have it fixed. But I don't know, we were imagining that like it would just be so costly and so expensive and so complicated to fix something like that. And we were like, in our mind, it makes more sense to just have this trailer that hopefully won't have that many problems. And then a truck, like we understand trucks, we understand cars, we can take a car in to get fixed, like no big deal. So logistically to us, it seemed easier to have a trailer and a truck, but there's going to be pros and cons with each.
Now, a big pro of a motorhome, in my opinion, is that they're easier to drive and they're much easier to back in than a travel trailer or a fifth wheel would be. Because basically it's just like driving a big vehicle. Like you don't have to worry about like how you're maneuvering when backing and stuff versus like backing in a fifth wheel is not that easy. Like you need some practice at it. I think most people within a couple days would be pretty comfortable backing in a motorhome. It might take you a while to be comfortable backing up a fifth wheel or a travel trailer. And for me, I mean, we had ours for a long time. I still didn't feel great whenever I had to back it in anywhere. So you really need more practice with a travel trailer or a fifth wheel than you would with a motorhome.
Yeah, especially I think a B or a C would be a lot easier to navigate, park, drive. An A might be, a little bit of a learning curve to drive because they're really big. It's more like a bus. But again, I think for a lot of travel therapists, I think you're probably not going to go with an A unless you were just able to get a really good deal on it because they're just so expensive.
Yep.
Or unless it was just something you wanted to invest in because you planned to keep it for a very long time to use as a recreational vehicle when you stop traveling.
Yeah.
So definitely want to consider the ease of driving, parking, backing, maneuvering, the type of vehicle, and the learning curve that's going to be involved there for you personally.
Yeah. Another thing to think about, kind of a pro in favor of motorhomes too, is that with a travel trailer or a fifth wheel, you have to think a lot about the tow vehicle and what the tow capacity of it is versus the motorhome. You don't have to worry about that. If you do tow a car behind it, then that can be any car. You can tow any car behind that. But for pulling a fifth wheel or a travel trailer, you need to either have an SUV that is either a small camper and an SUV that can pull it, or you need a big truck to pull a fifth wheel or a big travel trailer because they're much heavier. So finding, if you're thinking about getting a travel trailer or a fifth wheel, now you have to find a camper that looks good, but you also have to find a truck or a big SUV or a big van or something to pull it with. So you're kind of having to buy two things versus if it was a motorhome, you're just buying one thing. Yeah. So that makes things a little more complicated.
But you'll definitely also want to just consider, what do you already have? Maybe if you already have a decent sized SUV or truck, then it's more natural for you to be like, well, I already have this. Let me then see what it's rated for tow-wise, and then pick a travel trailer or a fifth wheel that suits your needs that you already have the tow capacity for. Or vice versa. Say you already have like a small compact car and you're fine with towing it, and maybe you decide to go with a class B or C motorhome because you're like, I've already got my nice little car, I'll just tow that. That seems easier to me. So a lot of your own personal experience, what you already have, what you're already used to, is going to play into this. And I'll definitely say that's the case too of whether you have any experience RVing at all. Like maybe you grew up RVing, or you already have an RV, or you know someone that has an RV. Maybe that'll change your whole perspective on all these decisions. Personally, we had no background, no experience. We literally went into it thinking like, this will make our life easier, this will make our life less expensive. But we started from zero, knowing nothing about RVs or trucks or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it just kind of depends on your own personal experience and knowledge there as well.
Yeah.
So the next thing you're going to consider is kind of the size in terms of the living space that you're going to feel comfortable with, as well as the size in terms of how much that's going to cost, how much fuel efficiency that's going to be. So I think for a lot of us, especially like when we went into it, we thought, gosh, it's going to be hard to live in this small space. We'd never done tiny living before. So we were looking at huge ones, like, oh, we're going to need this huge fifth wheel. There's no way I can live in that tiny, little travel trailer or that tiny little class B. So we were thinking like it's going to have to be big. But the bigger you go, the more it's going to cost, the harder to tow it's going to be, the harder to park it's going to be, the more fuel you're going to use, the bigger the truck you're going to need.
Yep.
If it's a fifth wheel or a travel trailer, because you're going to have a bigger tow capacity. So going big isn't always the greatest choice. Even though you feel like you need a lot of space, you may not need as much space as you think.
You can also have issues if you get too big of a camper, finding a campground to park it. Like some campgrounds have limits on how big their sites can hold, like what size camper will actually fit there. So Yeah, it is nice to have more space. We chose one with, we got a 33-foot fifth wheel, and it had two slide outs. And when we got that, I remember thinking like, this still might be too small. We were actually looking at bigger ones or three slide outs or things like that, but they're all very expensive. So we chose that. And then in hindsight, like after we'd been in it for a while, I was like, this is actually kind of more space than we need, which is kind of weird to think about because it's only like 200 square feet. But you get very efficient. I mean, campers are made to be very efficient anyway with their like kitchen space and how everything's set up. The bathroom's tiny, but everything's fine. You know, like they have it all. It's taken years and years of refinement to get to this point where they can fit a lot of things into a small space. And we actually could have probably gotten by with a camper that was 5 or 6 feet smaller than ours, and we would have still been in great shape. So in some ways you want to go err on the side of being bigger, especially if you have a family or you have pets or something. But for the two of us, we could have definitely gone smaller than we did, and we did not realize that when we bought it.
Yeah, of course it depends on you as a person. But I can tell you that I brought every single stitch of clothing that I owned. And at the time, we were really not minimalistic. I mean, I was like literally bringing everything I owned, putting it in the camper. And after having lived in it a couple of years, I definitely feel like we could have even gone smaller.
Yep.
We could have gone with a smaller travel trailer. We could have, I could say we could probably live in a Class C
For sure.
or a bigger Class B pretty comfortably. We have friends that do van life, and that does seem like a van that you build, like a custom van when it's those small vehicles. Those do seem tight, and our friends that live in truck campers, those do seem a little bit tight for my comfort. But we also met a friend with a truck camper that had a slide out, and I was like, wow, if you just add that extra like 40 square foot of space with the slide out, I'm like, yeah, actually we probably could live in that. So it's definitely, you can live with less than you think.
Yeah, especially if you're a single individual. There are some people we talk to that are just single individuals that are outdoorsy, that want to travel in a camper. And my advice is always to go pretty small there. You can get by, if it's just you or maybe you and a dog, you can get by with a really small space. Like a truck bed camper, you really could get by in that. A van, even a small travel trailer, you could definitely get by with. There's even the pop-up campers that a single individual would have plenty of space in. So if it's just you, a single individual, you really can get by with a lot less space than you think you need. But yeah, if you have a family, then you probably want to err on the side of a bigger place.
Yeah, because with travel therapy, you got to think you're going to be at work 40 plus hours a week. You know, maybe it's more like 45 or 50 after you account for drive time and going to the gym and this and that. And then on the weekends, you're going to be exploring. And if the weather's good, you can set up camp outside of your RV. Have a nice outdoor area that you can enjoy as a part of an extension of your living space. I know our friends that do van life definitely use that outdoor area a lot as an extension of their living space. So you can live with a lot less than what you think you need.
Yeah, and Whitney's right there. That's something we didn't really think a whole lot about is you're working 40 hours a week. You're probably commuting 20 minutes each way, going to the gym after work, going to the grocery store, going on weekend trips. We spent way less time actually inside the camper, not sleeping, than I thought we would. I mean, it's usually like 2 hours a day that you're cooking dinner, maybe watching TV, going to bed. So you don't need as much space as you think you do in a lot of cases. But if you're someone that values having more space, or you have like crafts or hobbies that you like to do that take up space, then you might need a bigger camper.
Yeah. So when it comes to the floor plans and whether you need extra bedrooms, I will also say, for example, with our friend Kayla that wrote the article for us, she brought up some extra points that we didn't have to take into account because her husband Ryan does work from home. They had to have that extra bunk room for him to have
camper.
Work from camper, yeah. Works remotely, so they preferred to have that extra room as a permanent office for him, so that he didn't have to set up and take down his office every day and like multi-use type of spaces. Because our other friends that live in the truck camper, they make it work. One of them works remotely, but he just sets up at the kitchen table every day. But if they want to eat at the table, then they have to move his laptop and work stuff. So you're constantly having to move it back and forth. So it depends on you. It depends on what's important to you. But for some people, you may prefer to have that extra space if somebody's working from home. You may prefer to have that extra space if there's kids, if there's pets. The other thing that Kayla mentioned that I didn't think about was they need to have a permanent place they have 2 cats, for litter boxes, food, and water. So they had to have a little extra space to allow room for that. Luckily, Ryan is an engineer, so it sounds like they engineered some ways to maneuver around in their RV. So many people we know modified their RVs after buying them to fit them, whether that was cosmetic, changing out the actual furniture, changing out the layout. We did zero things to ours ever. We just bought it and used it exactly as is. We didn't even do so much as like change the curtains. But it depends.
We were very lazy, very basic. We just wanted it to be there to sleep in, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah, so it depends on who you are. There's a lot of ways that you can modify things to suit you, and we were just talking about it. We were in the car on the way home this evening, getting ready for this talk and discussing what we should say. And I looked back at it, and I was like, knowing what I know now, I would have paid more attention if we'd known to the bones of the RV. Like, is it in good structural condition? Is it safe? Blah 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 blah. I was so hung up on at the time on the layout and the furniture and if it looked nice, and that stuff is so cosmetic and so could have been changed. And I wish that I hadn't been so hung up on that.
Whitney was very hung up on the dining room area and how nice the couches were, which at the time I was like, this doesn't matter at all, but she really wanted that, so we were more limited in what we could choose from because of the layout she wanted.
And I think once we finally found one that had a great layout that we really liked, and we really liked the furniture, and it looked really nice, and it looked clean and all that, we kind of got blindsided, or I don't know, I guess tunnel vision, and overlooked some other stuff that we should have noticed that was wrong with it in order to be like, oh yeah, this one fits all of our criteria. So learn from our mistakes. The next part we're going to talk about is, when it comes to the inspection.
Yeah.
But before we jump ahead to that, so we've already talked about deciding between motorhome, pull behind, the size, the tow vehicle, what type of vehicle you're going to need, and the tow rating. So if you're not familiar with that, you would basically look at, it's called like the gross weight of the travel trailer or the fifth wheel, if you decide to do a towable camper. And then you would have to look at what the truck or SUV is rated for. So it'll have a tow rating that you can look up to see if it can tow it or not.
Yep.
And then you obviously have to overestimate because you have to add in stuff, belongings in there, right?
Yeah. And you really want to make sure that there's a margin of error there, because for ours, we had like the tow rating of the truck was at least 1,500 to 2,000 pounds more than the camper was. But even then, pulling it up like hills, like if we were, or mountains, like if we're going, we drove up to New England, and I remember going through like Pennsylvania or something, some of the more hilly areas, it was having trouble pulling up hills. So if you're going to the West Coast and you're driving through Colorado, you want to have extra tow capacity to be able to make it up mountains and things, and not be going like 40 miles an hour on the interstate going up a mountain. Like that's a very bad feeling.
Yeah, so between talking to, like, say, the dealership or Googling things online, you can figure out that margin of error, or like how much do you need to add for a typical amount of stuff. I don't remember what that number is, but they'll be like, okay, this is the gross weight, but then you need to allow this many hundreds of pounds for your belongings and yourselves.
Yeah.
So take that in consideration. So then the other thing you want to take into consideration, obviously, is budget. You're going to have to decide, is this something I have enough cash to pay for up front? Is it something I'm going to be financing? Am I going to be financing both the tow vehicle and a trailer, or just the trailer, or am I financing the whole motorhome? So you have to know what your budget is. Are you going to finance it? What can you get approved for?
Yep. And this is another reason why we were very limited. We had, for whatever reason, I came up with a number in my mind that I did not want to go over. We saved up money on our first 2 travel contracts in order to pay cash for it. So we were limited on how much we could, or what we could buy, because we only had a certain amount we could spend. And now, if we were going to do it over, we probably either would have saved longer to be able to spend more money, or we would have just thought about financing something and had a better quality truck and camper that we wouldn't have had to worry about so much.
Yeah, so we're going to get into talking about new versus used, inspection, dealership, all that kind of stuff. But before we go on, if you are watching live, we'd love if you just hit that thumbs up button. Let us know that you're listening. Let us know what your situation is. Or even if you're watching later in the replay, just leave us a comment and let us know, hey, I'm thinking about traveling in an RV, or this is my situation. We'd love to hear from you. We already know tons of people that have started traveling in RVs over the years. Back when we first started, we didn't know a single other person. We'd never heard of anyone else that was traveling in an RV.
Yeah.
Instagram wasn't really as robust as it is now. People weren't talking about this kind of stuff. We knew zero other people that had an RV. So yeah, it was an interesting journey for us, but a lot more people have hopped on board in the last, however many years ago that was, 7 years.
Yeah.
So we know a lot of you guys are out there already traveling in RVs and campers and stuff. So let us know what your situation is. All right. So now the next kind of thing you're going to need to think about is, are you going to buy used or new? So as Jared mentioned, we kind of said, we set this sort of budget about, how much we wanted to spend, how much we were going to allot for that. And we were like, we're going to go with used because we didn't want to lose a lot of money on the depreciation of both the RV and also the truck. So we decided to go with a used one. That was really just going to be it for us. Like, there was no way we were going to buy new. There's pros and cons there. Obviously, some people prefer to buy new because they hope, okay, you're not going to have as many problems and hopefully you won't need as many repairs. That can be the case, but it's not always the case, because we've definitely heard of people driving it brand new off the lot and then still having manufacturer issues.
Yep. No, James, this isn't pre-recorded. It's live. So if you have any questions, let us know. We can answer them now.
Yep. So new versus used, definitely something to think about. Maybe you go new with one, used with the other. It'll just depend on what your situation is and what you're comfortable with as far as the financing. So once you decide new versus used, well, now you need to also consider, where are you going to search? Where are you going to look? You can buy both new and used from dealerships. Sometimes dealerships have ones that are on consignment or that they're reselling, that they've gotten from a buyback situation, or you can buy from an individual.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell them a little bit more about what we ended up doing?
Yeah, so we decided we want to buy used. We had a very limited budget. We saved up for it. So we didn't want to get a camper that was too old, and we wanted to make sure things were in pretty good condition. We wanted to get a truck that had good reviews, and we were hoping we wouldn't have any issues with. And but we were also a little bit on a time crunch because we were already working assignments then. We were very dead set on the beginning of our careers, working back-to-back contracts, so not taking much time off. So we were only going to look at campers like on the weekends, and we also had other things we wanted to do on the weekends. So it was we really kind of limited ourselves. So we ended up going to see, we went to a couple RV shows to look at campers. We kind of found like the general idea of what we wanted. Wanted a fifth wheel that was pretty big, that had slide outs, that was probably 5 or 6 years old. So we didn't want it to be too old, but not new, because we knew the new ones would be too expensive. And then we wanted to find a truck that was a little older, that was a diesel, that would be able to pull the fifth wheel. So those were basically our criteria. We searched around on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, the RV shows,
RVtrader.com.
RV Trader. We looked everywhere, and eventually we found something. It was probably 3 or 4 hour drive that we went and looked at. Our issue was that we didn't really know what we were looking for. Like Whitney said, we knew what we wanted in terms of like what it should look like and what layout we wanted and stuff like that, but we did not know like what we needed to inspect. Like, how do you know if there's water damage? How do you know if everything's working properly? We just kind of took the dealer's word for that, and that was a mistake. Yeah,
so we kind of thought going through a dealer was going to make the process easier, and it did in some ways, and they do an inspection to ensure that everything's working before you take it off the lot. They usually do a walkthrough and say like, oh, all these lights work, the appliance work, all that stuff. But they can definitely overlook stuff, and obviously they're definitely biased too, because they're trying to get it off their lot. Ideally, you would have a third party inspect it, and I wish we had known someone who could have helped us with that. Ideally, if you know anyone in your family or have a friend who has had some experience with RVs, it's better to bring someone with you that can help you with that. Obviously, you could probably also go on Craigslist or any number of, I'm sure there's all kinds of different sites now where there are experts out there that could help you with that. You can maybe even find, like, I know on like Angie's List and things like that, you can find like an RV repair person. I bet if you were to contact someone of that nature, they may be willing to help you for a fee, come and take a look at one with you and tell you kind of like an unbiased opinion of what to look for. I wish that we had taken a little bit of extra time to do something like that, because we ended up buying a camper that had some water damage, that had some stuff wrong with it that we just didn't notice. and it ended up being a lot of problems down the road and a lot of repairs.
Yeah.
So those are some things to think about. But again, we've talked to people before that bought a brand new RV, never been owned, right off the lot, and they've had issues with it. And now usually, if that is the case, hopefully, if it's a brand new one, they'll have some kind of warranty, manufacturer's warranty, and usually the dealership will help you in those situations. So even if you still have to get repairs done, hopefully the dealership will have your back. Now, obviously, if you buy from an independent seller, there are no guarantees, no warranties. So you have to be a lot more cautious buying from an individual.
Yeah, and if you're buying from an actual individual, then there's no warranty at all, and there's not even going to be an inspection, and they're just trying to get rid of it. So in that situation, if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what to look for, you really should have someone come look at it for you or with you, just to be sure, because it's a major decision. I mean, that's a lot of money. At minimum, probably you're going to be spending $15,000, but probably more than that on a camper. So you want to make sure that it's structurally sound and there's not water damage and there's not mold or something like that you wouldn't know to look for.
Yeah, so I would say in a lot of cases, buying the RV itself from a dealership makes a lot of sense because hopefully it's more trustworthy. Hopefully you have more protections. Hopefully you can, get that walkthrough, get that inspection done. Also, if you need to finance, they may be able to assist you with the financing process, or you might decide to go through your bank or whoever to get your own private loan. But sometimes it's just easier to go through the dealership. Now, in terms of buying a tow vehicle, many of you may have already had experience in the past with buying used vehicles. So we didn't feel too uncomfortable buying from an individual seller when it came to purchasing our truck. Although, again, we did actually run into some issues with that because Jared had bought and sold dozens of cars in his day, but he didn't, and neither did I, have any experience with a diesel truck.
Yeah.
And so we kind of just looked at we test drove it. It ran fine. It looked fine. We looked at the mileage. We looked at the year, and we thought, seems fine. But apparently, with diesel trucks and models of trucks, there can be issues that are known. Different model years will have different issues, and we didn't know that.
Yeah. So yeah, if you find a truck and a camper that look good, definitely put in a little bit of time to make sure that there's not known issues with those, or at least if there are known issues, that you know about them up front and know what to look for to see if that issue applies to that individual unit.
Yeah, so overall I would say just try not to be in too big of a hurry. Give yourself time because it is a very big decision. It's a very costly decision to go into buying a truck and a camper. Safety absolutely needs to be a priority. You don't want to be broken down in the middle of nowhere, moving across the country to a travel assignment on the side of the road. So safety, of course, and then just time, money, and headache. You can hopefully avoid by doing your research in advance. So ideally, if you decide to go down this path and you're looking into this decision, it'd be great if you knew someone who could help you, who's done it before. If not, you need to spend a lot of time on YouTube, Reddit, on different RV forums, just learning more before you get into it, because we relied way too much on the dealer to just tell us things, and it's not really in their best interest to tell you when things are wrong or not a great deal. They're just trying to sell it to you.
Yep.
So that's our advice. All right, couple of comments here. Hey, Madison. Madison says, 2 PTs here. We're really excited to start traveling in the next year, and we are in the market for an RV to live in, so thanks for all the information. You're welcome, Madison. Hopefully you guys have good luck with finding your RV. Tons of people are out there doing it and loving it and having a great time living the RV lifestyle, and I think it can work really well as a couple. Yeah,
there's more than ever now. I mean, like Whitney said, I feel like it was fairly rare to find, especially therapists living in an RV back when we did it, but now I swear there's probably a dozen that I know of just right off the top of my head. So there's a lot of people doing it now.
Yeah, at least they weren't talking about it on the internet. Maybe they were doing it, but they weren't posting about it on Facebook and Instagram. So we didn't know anybody back then, and that's why we thought it was pretty fun and pretty cool. That's why we named our whole blog after it, because it was very unique back then.
Yep.
But it probably would have been better if we'd done a little more research and gotten involved in some kind of RV community, like some Facebook groups or something. There's so many resources out there that you can take advantage of to learn more and ask questions, and somebody's experienced it before, so they'll hopefully have an answer for you.
Yep. And the real big thing that I think we should probably say is that I think RVing is more of a lifestyle versus traveling, short-term housing that's just finding a place to live. I think if you if you don't have a major reason for choosing an RV, like either kids, pets, something like that, then you really should want to be involved in like the RV lifestyle community, whatever, if you choose that route, because probably it's going to be less hassle overall if you just do short-term housing. And you're not going to save a lot of money like a lot of people think, like we mentioned earlier. So if you don't have some major reason for doing it, I don't know, it might not be the best choice, especially if you're a single individual. Short-term housing, maybe renting a room in a house, you can probably save money that way versus an RV. But if you're a couple or you have a reason for doing it, then it can make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think you need to know what you're getting into, because you might look at it and think, gosh, short-term housing, that seems like such a hassle. But when it comes down to it, yes, there are hassles with moving in and out of places, and you never know what you're going to get. But at the end of the day, you're a renter, and you can always fall back on the landlord if something goes wrong. Whereas if you invest in an RV, now you own something, now it's your home, and you have to take care of it. And if you're somebody who's like, that's great, I'm excited to have my own place, I'm excited to take care of it, that's wonderful.
I'm excited to have weekend projects and like...
We literally know our friends, Irene and her husband that live in a truck camper, like that's his hobby. He likes it. Like Hugh loves the project.
Yeah.
On the weekends, he's like loving figuring out, tinkering with this and that. That was not us, unfortunately.
Not us.
We wanted to spend our weekends exploring the local area, working on other things and passions and traveling, and we did not want to spend our weekends doing maintenance and repairs on our RV and truck.
Yeah.
And to us, that became such a hassle, but you may not be the same way. Maybe you're someone who enjoys projects and enjoys working on cars and vehicles, and you may love it.
Or maybe you do a lot better job of choosing a camper and truck than we did, and you don't have any issues to worry about. And in that case, we'd have a much different experience.
Yeah, but at the same time, even if there's not repairs, you still should be doing maintenance to take care of it, just like you do maintenance to take care of your car.
Yeah,
you
true.
should be caulking the roof, and you should be cleaning the tires and covering the tires, and weatherproofing your vehicle and all that kind of stuff, and making sure that it stays good year after year so that it keeps its value, so it doesn't break down. And we just didn't love that part of it personally.
Yeah.
So, just a lot to think about. So I just wouldn't go into it thinking like, oh, I'm only going to do this because it's going to be easier than short-term housing, because it may or may not be.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that gives you guys some insights on choosing a different type of RV. Check out Kayla's article. We just published it on our website at traveltherapymentor.com. She talks about all the different types and some considerations that go into it. We also have some articles linked on there just about the pros and the cons and some things to consider as far as like finding RV parks, all those types of things. We could go on and on about the different things that go into RVing. But as we always say when we talk about this stuff, I think like we can be quite negative about it, but we enjoyed the journey. It was a really cool experience.
And it's funny too, because we talked about how great it was all the time back then, and it's just now that we can be more objective, and we've done short-term housing, we've done the RV. They both have pros and cons. It's not one that's way better than the other. It's just that, it's hard to be objective when you're in the middle of it. But we did enjoy the journey, and it was fun, and we learned a lot, and I think we would handle a lot better now than we did back then. We're older, we know more, but yeah, it's just something that you have to be ready for.
Madison asks, what was your experience finding a campground to accommodate the camper that was close enough to your travel assignments while keeping the weather in mind? Yeah. This is a good point. So we always...
she also said as a travel couple.
As a travel couple.
I will say, first of all, it's way easier now than when we were doing it, because there's way more jobs than there were back then. We were much more limited. You guys now that are traveling as couples are in a lot easier position finding jobs than we were. So our experience, we had to be much more picky, or much less picky. Now you can find jobs pretty much wherever you want to go. But yes, you probably want to avoid like extreme temperatures. You probably want to avoid the north in the winter and the south in the summer. Even the best campers, four-season campers, don't do really great with those temperatures. So when we started, we were just like, okay, we're never really going to be north of Virginia in the winter, and we're never really going to be south of like North Carolina, I guess, in the summer. Like we kind of wanted to be in the more moderate areas, and I would definitely recommend doing the same, because not only is your camper probably going to have trouble like heating or cooling and extreme temperatures, but also you want to have more outside space that you can utilize. And if you're in New York in the winter or if you're in Florida in the summer, then you're not going to want to spend a lot of time outside. So that makes the camper seem smaller than it would be if you had some outdoor space to utilize.
Yeah, so the other thing is a lot of times near bigger cities, it's going to be harder to find RV parks. So make sure when you're doing your searches that you search RV parks with long-term stays, because if you just type campground, sometimes you're going to get day use or weekend use campgrounds that don't have any facilities. You need to specifically search for RV parks that have full hookups and allow 30 plus day stays or long-term stays. So the good news is it is kind of easy when you're pitched certain jobs from your recruiters to just go ahead and run a search. Like if they pitch you a job in Chicago, you can just, even before saying yes, I'll take the interview, you can just search around Chicago and quickly find out there aren't any RV parks really that do long-term stays within an hour of Chicago. So you're kind of going to be like, well, guess we can't go to Chicago.
Yeah.
We could go maybe an hour outside of Chicago and maybe there's an RV park there. But like similarly, you're not going to want to be in New York City, like right in the city, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to probably not going to be in the major cities. Now there are some cities, like obviously Phoenix, Arizona is going to have a lot of RV parks because a lot of snowbirds go there. So luckily you can run a search fairly quickly to know if there's going to be long-term stay RV parks in the area. But for the most part, we felt it was like fairly easy to find two jobs together.
We didn't have trouble, but also kind of the things we're talking about, we kept that in mind. So we avoided the extreme temperatures, we avoided cities, and with that in mind, we really, if there was two jobs that we were interested in, usually we could find an RV park within, at maximum, I think one of us had to drive like 30 minutes, but usually we were within probably 15 minutes each way. So
Yeah.
not too difficult.
I think only one assignment ever, and that was because one of us got canceled and we had to search out something. Did we drive more than 30 minutes? So one of our assignments, I got canceled, but Jared didn't. And so in order to find something else in the area, I ended up driving about an hour. But every other time, we were always 30 minutes or less. We never drove far.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there are any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments or send us a message. We'd be happy to help. But again, check out our other resources about RVs. If you scroll back through our podcasts or our videos, you'll see some old ones about RVs, as well as on our website. If you just search about RVs, we have some posts on there as well.
Yep. All right. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
All right. Bye.
Take care.